farming.
Yeah.
And we're working on clearing and cleaning all of them, but it's a long
So
process.
that's what Larry's doing, right? Larry
Yes.
Hassel? All right. And, okay, great.
Yes,
Oh, yeah. So
exactly.
we can also build a fire.
Yep.
Hit the fire ring.
So if I'm
Especially this season because it's so wet.
Yep.
Yeah,
If it were like a dry
We're gonna go ahead and get it
season,
started.
there
here,
might
so-
be a notice that you shouldn't.
yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
and
great.
we took away a couple of the sites. Oh, I'm sorry. We
We
took
took
away a
away and I
couple of the
get
sites.
Mhm.
So you would want to check the website
Yeah,
to see
okay,
which ones
sure.
we took away.
Right.
Sorry.
You're good. All right. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Tonight, we at Left Bank Books are excited to celebrate the launch of local author Dean Klinkenberg's new book, The Wild Mississippi, State-by-State Guide to the River's Natural Wonders. So some notes before we begin. Tonight's event is only possible because of your support. When you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into our local economy. So it helps keep our roads paved, our parks beautiful, and so much more. It also helps us get writers the support they deserve through events such as this. So thank you all so much for being here. I also want to extend a welcome to our virtual audience. Thank you everyone watching from wherever you are online. You will be able to participate in the Q&A session at the end by leaving your question as a comment on YouTube. So thank you for being here. We at Left Bank are always working to produce wonderful new events for readers of all ages. Of note, on July 8th, we'll be joined by historian Patricia Cleary. Her new book is called Mound City, the place of the indigenous past and present in St. Louis. In her book, Cleary tackles the study of the mounds that predated and once stood on the site of St. Louis. And Andrew Hurley says that the book stands as a testament to the enduring Native American presence in an important American city. You can find more information on that event as well as a full calendar on left-bank.com. So for tonight's event, Dean Klinkenberg is a St. Louis-based writer. Since leaving his career as an academic psychologist, he has focused much of his writing and research on the Mississippi River. He has driven virtually all of the Great River Road, which is very impressive, hiked and canoed the river on multi-day expeditions, and cruised on the American Queen's steamboat as a guest lecturer. His other books include Frank Dodge Mysteries, which explore another side of the river's world. He's also served as contributing editor for the Big River magazine, and his writing has appeared in the Smithsonian, the National, Minneapolis Star Tribune, and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Dean is a longtime partner of the Mississippi River Network, a coalition of organizations advocating for healthy and resilient river ecosystems. The Wild Mississippi, a state-by-state guide to the river's natural wonders, runs straight through the heart of the nation, shaping its history and its identity, as does the river itself. The three of us understand the essences of the Mississippi River. It is a life-giving force that sustains thriving ecosystems across wetlands, prairies, and bluffs. And through this new guide, you will discover the amazing flora and fauna of the Mississippi River, the best ways to explore it state by state. This book is the perfect introduction to one of the most vital ecosystems and features of North America. So please join me in welcoming Dean Klinkenberg.
Well, thank you for being here. So I'm going to do something a little different tonight. I just didn't think it made a lot of sense to read from a guidebook, although I'm sure the writing is crisp and exciting. I want to do something different. So I thought what I'd do instead is I thought I would tell you a little bit about my journey with the river and how I got so connected to it and how it kind of got its hooks in me. So bear with me. I'm going to talk for a little bit. I put together some notes so I didn't forget to tell different parts of the story. But I want to tell you how I came to the river. And I was a kid who grew up basically in the suburbs and in a fairly small town in southern Minnesota in farm country. So I had some woods nearby and some of these places we go and play in, but I didn't really know much about the Midwest. I didn't know about Midwestern geography. I didn't know a lot about the Mississippi. And when I graduated from high school, I went to college at UW-La Crosse. And I can still remember in my head that day when we drove east on Interstate 90 from Albert Lee through all these agricultural fields toward La Crosse. And when you get near La Crosse, the road starts to bend a little bit and then starts to go down. And in just a couple of miles, this incredible river valley opens up in front of you. It's this most dramatic scene. And I can only imagine if you've been driving on I-90 through the Dakotas and Montana, and you get to this spot where all of a sudden you have this beautiful river valley. It must be quite a revelation to see that. So it was for me. And it was really those years when I was living in La Crosse where I got real hooked on the river. I'd say it was kind of a slow build in some ways. The river did get its hook to me enough to, I feel like it penetrated into my soul, if you will. But I would ride my bike down to the river, find a place to sit and think for a little while. I loved hiking the bluffs in that area. There were just so many ways to be outside and be near the river, and it was always this presence in La Crosse. People in La Crosse, I think, identify as people who are Mississippi River denizens, or the Mississippi is very much a presence in their identity and in their lives. So my first paddling trip on the Mississippi was in La Crosse. It was a fairly not terribly ambitious paddle, but my buddy Rick and I put in a canoe just on the west side of Pettiboat Island. So we paddled up this backwater channel and then up the main channel. And sometimes I like to joke that my first paddle trip on the Mississippi was one where we went upriver, but the reality was we're going to have to do some upriver paddling at some point. So why not start there? So we hit the main channel. The current was surprisingly strong. We were a couple of young guys. I didn't think it was going to be that big a deal, but we paddled for a good hour, I think, before we finally got a little ways upriver, and we found this beautiful little spot. Like there's so many spots like this on the Mississippi, the upper Mississippi especially. A wooded island, a nice little beach. So we pulled over and we used that as our spot to rest for the day. Now Rick and I had a little bit of a history. I had a crush on him, and it wasn't reciprocated. And at one point, not long after we got there, Rick asked if it made him gay if we went skinny dipping. And I might have said something to the effect of no, but it makes you a tease, or maybe I just thought that. I'm not entirely sure, but so we did go for a swim, and then we just spent the rest of the day relaxing on the island. I'm somebody who's prone to overthinking things as it is. And one of the strongest memories I have from that day was just how easy it was to lay on the beach and have my body calmed and my mind quieted from that time hanging out next to the river. And that's an impression that I think that's a common theme that's carried through all these years of being along the river. So I left La Crosse behind, left Rick behind, and I moved on down here to St. Louis for grad school, where there's a very different relationship with the river. It was much harder to get to the Mississippi when I got down here. And it felt like the river was sort of almost intentionally walled away from our consciousness. So in La Crosse, where that was very much a presence in people's lives, it felt like here, nobody really wanted anything to do with it anymore. But I still found a way, and we had friends who lived near Valmeyer, and when we went to visit them, we'd drive down the Bluff Road and along the river, and I'd look for excuses to take little trips here and there along the river. We'd go down to the Arch. In the flood of '93, we helped them move out of their house, and then, less than a week later, the levee broke and they had 20 feet of water in their house. So I have some very vivid memories of these experiences with the river too. I understand its power. I understand what it can do. I understand the scale of this river. But I also feel like over time I developed this very personal connection with it. Well, I was in school. I moved down here for grad school. I met John not long after I moved down here, and I got caught up in the rigors of getting a PhD, and then I went on and worked as an academic psychologist for 12 years. And I figured out, maybe a little later than I should have, but I figured out after a while that it just was not a world I was well suited for. I was good at the work. I was rising up academically, but I was really unhappy with the work that I was doing. And I could feel the stress building up. I was snapping at people. I was doing things that were really out of my character. Got into a public fight at a meeting, which, if any of you know me, it's probably really hard to imagine me getting that upset and yelling at somebody in a public setting. And it was a doctor at that I was yelling at. So it was time to do something different. And by then we've done some traveling. My eyes had been opened up more to the possibilities from travel, and I figured, maybe I could find some way to combine writing with travel. Then the problem was, what do you write about? What do you write about? I figured for me there was really only one area that made sense, and that was going to be to write about the Mississippi. From a business perspective, that was probably not the smartest decision. I could have written about many other places around the world, but I just felt pulled to write about this big river. I just didn't think anybody was doing enough justice to describing how special this place was. So I took the dive, and I wanted to write books that encouraged people to stay, to spend time along the river. I wanted to produce these books that detailed all these different things you can do along the Mississippi. So you didn't just drive past it and say you'd seen the river and moved on. I wanted to give people excuses to stay for a while. So I wrote some guidebooks, mostly for places north of here. I eventually got 3 guidebooks published for some very small segments of the river, and felt very pleased when one of those guidebooks, the Driftless Area book, got a really nice review in the Chicago Tribune, which was not easy to do as somebody who was independently published. So I was thrilled with that. And it was fun. I was having some great experiences. And when I wasn't spending time in a library or hanging out in a bar talking about the town with the locals, then I'd go for hikes in the bluffs. And one of my silly little goals was I was trying to hike to the tops of all the bluffs that I could along the upper Mississippi, at least without trespassing, so all the publicly accessible ones. I think I got to most of them, although now there's some new ones, so I'm going to have to do some more hiking, which my body's not quite as agile as it was when I started doing this, so I don't know. But I had so many collectively good experiences from this. I got to talk to towboat pilots about their experiences on the river. I talked with a scientist who walked on the bottom of the river. I got to know people like Mike Clark and John Resky and a guide up in northern Minnesota, Terry Larson, and I got to learn about the river from their perspective. I wanted to sort of do as much as I could to see the river through their eyes and to have experiences that paralleled those. In 2014, I did my first, well, I guess my only solo paddle, when I think about it. And it was just a quick little 2-day, 1-night trip between Itasca State Park and Bemidji. I started just downriver of Itasca. And Terry Larson just hooked me up with a canoe, and I just spent 2 days paddling through wetlands and getting lost only once. I missed the spot where I was going to pull over to camp for the night and had to keep going into sunset. But it was a fantastic experience to be out there. It felt like I was really out in the wild. And in that part of Minnesota, there aren't many towns, not many people around. It's very easy to get that sense of being away from the city. Well, from each trip, I learned a little bit, and one of those lessons from all these trips was that once you've camped on an island in the Mississippi, car camping just doesn't do it for me anymore. So I still do some car camping, but I'd rather be on an island somewhere. In 2015, I had a chance to paddle with John Resky on an epic trip for me, at least. And we got in a boat, Algiers Point in New Orleans. There was a group of us in 2 canoes, and we paddled to the Gulf of Mexico. And there are only 2 ways to get to the end of the river, by boat or by air. You can't drive to the end of it. So I wasn't going to miss this opportunity to get to the end of the river. I'd been to the headwaters a lot, but getting to the end was a whole different thing. And we had some interesting moments. We got stuck in one place for 3 nights because a storm was coming through, and it was not the most exciting day in my life to spend most of a Sunday inside my tent while heavy rain is falling all around me and wondering how my tent is going to hold up. But it held up fine. And in the evening, it cleared up, and we had a nice dinner. The next day, we got out, and we started paddling again, and we had one of those beautiful mornings I think maybe happens a lot after a rain, where there's just a little mist over the river. The water is very still. The air is cool, and it just feels revitalizing on those mornings. So we got to the Gulf. I got to the end of the river, and it was a terrific moment. I didn't feel, I felt satisfied, but I didn't feel like I was done. I wondered if once I got that far and I reached the end of the river, would this be it for me? Would I feel like I had done everything that I wanted to do? But my curiosity was just growing at that point. I wanted to learn a lot more about the life on the river, the plant and animal life. It's up to that point, I had mostly written about towns. I'd written history of communities, museums to go to. I knew a lot about places to eat or have a drink anywhere along the Mississippi. I still do. So I started taking close-up photos of plants and trying to figure out how to identify what species they were. And then I found out there are a couple of apps I could put on my phone that would help ID birds and plants. So I started using those more regularly. I just recently went through my catalog of pictures to organize that whole thing. I was curious how many plants, for example, I have pictures of. I have 350 different species of plants now, most of them close-ups. So it's just taken a while, it's taken a few years to get there, but it's something I'm still very interested in. I think I like knowing the range, the variety of life that's around me. And one of the things that this process, this curiosity drove home to me was how much variety and abundance of life there is along the river, how much of it depends on the river. So in 2021, when Timber Press reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in writing this book, my first reaction was, no, I'm a doctor, not an ecologist, Jim.
Yeah.
Star Trek joke.
Yeah.
But then I thought about it a little bit. I didn't immediately turn them down. And I realized this was a great opportunity. It would give me a chance to write a book that would go into detail about the river's world, about the plant and animal life, about the different parts of the river. And it would give me a chance to, I think, show off the river in a way that people, help them see the river in a way that maybe they haven't really seen it before. In St. Louis, again, like we're kind of walled off from it. We see it as an inconvenience, maybe something to cross, or maybe something that moves barges. We don't often see much more than that, except maybe the paddlers here who've been out on the river a lot, see the river in a very different way. I wanted more people to be able to see that. So I got started on this book, and I made the decision also that I was going to write a book that focused on the positive aspects of the river. I know there are problems on the river. You were here for Voices Talk last week. We got to hear a lot more about that. All that is absolutely true, but it's also true there's still some great places along the river that support a variety of life, and I really wanted to help people see that. So a few weeks into this project, after I signed the contract, my father got very ill. And I had a very strange 6-7 months where I was running back and forth between researching the river and going back to Kansas City to help out my dad. And it was, in retrospect, like I'm so grateful for the fact that I had that time to go out and spend it along the river and help clear my mind a little bit, to help me put everything in place again. That the river again provided this space for me to sort through a lot of what was happening in my life that might have been very difficult to do in other circumstances. So I think the river provided great comfort for me during those months. Let's see. He got progressively worse, and I remember moments when I was writing, when I had this incredible focus, where I could sit down and I could knock out almost a whole chapter in a couple of hours. The words just seemed to flow easily and naturally. And then, I had to turn in this manuscript eventually. And I, in retrospect, I wasn't entirely sure if those words were any good. I knew I'd written a lot, but I didn't know if it was going to be, if I'd hit the mark or not with what I was trying to do. My father passed away just 3 weeks after I turned in the manuscript. At least during that 3-week period of time, I didn't have my mind cluttered with worrying about deadlines or anything else. I was free from all that. I got to focus all my attention on those last 3 weeks. I just think it would have been a lot bleaker time dealing with all that if I hadn't had the opportunity to spend so much time along the river. So turned in the manuscript, and then I, of course, once I had time to really start thinking about what I had done, then I started the writer's nervousness, all the insecurities kicking in, the imposter syndrome kicking in. What was I thinking? I'm a psychologist, and I wrote a book about ecology, about the natural world of the Mississippi. So I was nervous for a while, wondering whether what I had turned in was really going to be adequate. And everything went very smoothly with the publishing company. They seemed very pleased with it. And then it really wasn't until I started getting feedback from people who weren't connected with it that I started to feel like maybe I had done what I set out to do. And in particular, there was one review I saw on Amazon where they used the word warm to describe this book. And I thought, they get it. Because I was trying to write this book that does tribute to the life along the river and not just a dry textbook that describes the genus of the animals or plants along the way, that describes that life in a way that makes people want to get to know it better too. So I hope that this book is something that will help you maybe develop your own relationship with the river. Some of you already have very deep relationships with the river. Maybe it'll show you something you don't know. Some of you, maybe it'll, at least the very least, I hope it'll tell you about some places maybe you don't know as much about. The first half of the book just goes into the ecology of the river. I broke it down into different kinds of ecosystems, so wetlands, forests, that kind of thing. But the second half is a state-by-state listing of where you can go to be near the river and really experience it. So I think there's 166 of them, and I bet nobody in this room has been to all of them.
Some of them are quite hidden away.
Well, some are a little hidden away, but none of them are hard to get to. Okay, one of the things I was thinking as I was driving down muddy roads, trying to get to some of these places is, I don't really have a car built for this. And probably most people who are going to be out exploring these places don't either. So I did not include any place that would require four-wheel drive to get to. So they're all relatively accessible. Maybe they take 2 or 3 turns sometimes to get there. But you'll be able to get there just fine. I don't really think of myself as an adventurer at all, especially in this company with some of the trips that y'all have been on. I do like an adventure. I'm open to adventure, but I don't think of myself as a personality type that takes on big adventures. But I do need to get away. And don't get me wrong, I'm a city boy. I love the city. I love living in the city. We live in the Shaw neighborhood. But sometimes I just need to get away from it. And for me, that has meant going to the river. I was thinking that sometimes we talk about when we're outdoors that we have these innate fears. When a wolf howls, how it, raises the hair on our skin. I think the opposite must be true as well, though. That we must have some innate pleasure as well from being outdoors. That being out there provides some connection for us, and maybe when we're out there, there's some sense at a deeper level where we feel like, we're back at home again. So anyway, that's all I gotta say for tonight. A little bit of my backstory. Do you have any questions or comments or? Yeah.
Okay, so around St. Louis, the river is industrial, it's swift. I mean, just the other day, somebody lost their life in a kayak because they got too close to a barge. How far north do you have to go to where it's really kind of safe for canoes and kayaks? I mean, it's a totally different character I know up in Minnesota, and it's just great. It's voluminous down here. So.
Right. Well, and we have lots of experts here that can tell you that we didn't have to go far at all because there was a whole stretch of 8 or 9 miles where there's no barge traffic from the chain of rocks south to downtown. And that's, I think, an unappreciated area where people can kayak. But you don't have to go much further north from that either to have good places to paddle around. I think really the most challenging area, the area that we should probably avoid, is that through the port around the arch and then south there to maybe the JB Bridge. But anywhere north of that, anywhere south of that, there are going to be opportunities to paddle. And, it's not a place you should go if you've never paddled before. It's not a place to get your, to learn how to paddle a kayak for the first time. But if you're with people who know what they're doing, that's a great way to learn. If you have some skill already, if you know how to self-rescue, there are lots of places on the river that are perfectly fine to paddle on.
Okay, so in Iowa, are there companies recreational companies that make use of the river for kayaking and stuff and canoeing?
There's, there aren't any. Well, there's one outfitter near Burlington, Iowa, and I'm blanking on their name right now. I'll think of it in a minute. But That's about the only one I can think of in that area. There are a few companies that do boat tours on like a pontoon boat, like
Yeah.
eco tours in the backwaters. And then as you go further north, there's the Broken Paddle in Wabasha. There are canoe company, there are companies that outfitters that take people on the river in the Twin Cities. And then further north, when you get north of the Twin Cities, there are 2 or 3 folks that rent canoes and kayaks as well. But kind of when you get really south of, like even around La Crosse, there's not an outfitter. There's no. You might be able to rent a canoe from the UW La Crosse campus or Winona State. Sometimes those rec centers will rent canoes or kayaks to people who aren't students or unaffiliated. St. Cloud State University, I know they do it. Bemidji State, those places definitely do. So UW La Crosse, I think, does as well. There's just not really a formal outfitter in those areas, so you'd still have to, transport it yourself and be responsible for it.
Okay.
River Basin Canoes.
River Basin, yeah.
In Burlington, Iowa.
Okay.
And they so there's an area around the Port Louisa National Wildlife Refuge, and I think they really specialize there. There's a signed canoe trail through part of that area. Have you done that? I mean, other than your long distance trip, have you ever paddled that section of the river, Mike? Or
Where's that?
around Port Louisa, Burlington to Muscatine, up in that area? There's some pretty good backwaters up there, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it the Missouri or the Mississippi south of the confluence?
Ooh.
This one's kind of funny. No, he wrote a book about Mississippi.
I don't have any problem with the name Mississippi carrying south. And I think there are any number of criteria you could use to go with that. Essentially, it's arbitrary. So we could sit in a bar and argue over this for a couple of hours, but I put together a whole 45-minute talk to go deep into this.
You have?
I have, yes. And the first time I did it for the Big Money Speaker Series in Roachport to tell them why the name Mississippi belongs.
Is it online? They record that.
It might be, yeah. There are different ways to think about this, but Missouri is obviously longer than the Mississippi when they meet. But historically, in terms of the amount of water they carry, they were pretty close. It's a little hard to tell today because the dams regulate so much of the flow, the dams on the Missouri River. But historically, the flow was pretty similar. And when you look at the map, the Mississippi is coming straight down, north to south, and it's the Missouri that's coming in from the side. So, which road would you consider the main road? The one that comes in from the side or the one that's coming in from the top? The other thing that I point to also is, like, from what we know, the Mississippi has probably been flowing for in the range of 70 million years. The Missouri River, if you define that just as the river that eventually yields its water to the Gulf of Mexico, maybe 2 million years. It's really a product of the glaciers. Prior to that, before the glacier era, there was a river that flowed mostly from west to east, and I think went to Hudson Bay or went out to the Arctic Ocean. So the glaciers remade some of the landscape of the drainage of North America, but the Missouri, I think, is probably a much younger river, at least the way we think of the Missouri today. So if you go by age, and you gotta give some props to age in this case, right?
There's a practical point to be made on this.
Yeah.
Mississippi just got rid of the Confederate flag as its state flag. If we try and change the name of the Mississippi River to the Missouri down there, I think we go back to Civil War. They ain't having it. It's the Mississippi.
Yeah. Because there's already a state named Missouri, so they can't change their state name to reflect it. Yeah. Well, you think about it this way. The other thing I think about, really the name Mississippi exists because of an accident of history, because the early French explorers and missionaries learned the name from Ojibwe people, mostly up in that part around the Great Lakes. And they communicated that back to people in France, mostly, who put that name on maps. And then Marquette and Joliet come along, and they already know that this name is used for this particular river, and they get on it, and they start paddling south. So they carried that name with them as they went south. So it showed up on their map because of that. If, people had explored the river from the Gulf of Mexico to the north, it would have a completely different name. So, but I'm glad Mississippi stuck. Yeah, some of those early French explorers had ideas about changing the name to something else. I think there was one of them wanted to call it Colbert after a French minister, which might have been pleasing to a certain late night talk show host today. Another wanted to call it the Immaculate Conception. Can you imagine if that was the name of the river today, the Immaculate Conception?
Oh, people have a heyday.
Yeah, no thanks. And there are even some maps where the lower river was labeled as the St. Louis River. But Mississippi stuck.
Speaking of names of the Mississippi, you have said Great River is a misnomer. Can you go into why you believe that?
I think, if we're going to be kind of faithful to the original words, so it comes from two, and I'm not a language expert in all this. I'm relaying what I learned from a man who is a language expert, an Ojibwe language expert, Dr. Anton Troyer. So it comes from two words, one, Mitzi and Zibi. And Zibi is the word for river. And Mitzi is the one that's kind of in dispute, like what does this word actually mean? And when I've asked him and when others have asked him, his response is generally that the phrase together means something like long river, which is not very sexy, but what's interesting, I have not had a chance to really go deep into this, is the Ojibwe people use different words for different parts of the river. And I assume that they had kind of a sense of the river as a whole and a name for that too. But a lot of the places along the river, maybe it was like way stations or towns, they had names for those specific areas. So there would be a name for the spot where the river emerges from Lake Windagocious, for example. So every spot, all these spots. And in Mississippi seemed to be a name that they used for the river up to around where the Crow Wing River merges with the Mississippi. And some things that I've read, and I heard Winona LaDuke say this once too, that the Ojibwe people from that point on called it Gitsazibi, and that would be Great River. So they have a different word that means great, which is Gitsi, something like that. And I think Lake Superior was Gitsagumi, right? So yeah, I just know it from Gordon Lightfoot.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I think, if you want to take poetic license, why not Great River? But I don't think it's really the way it would be translated.
It wouldn't be more Long River.
It'd be more like Long River. And there were other Native American names for the river. I found at least 3, I think, that do seem to translate as Great River when you get further south of Minnesota in particular. So I do think there has long been a sense that this river is a special place, is particularly meaningful to people who lived, to indigenous people who lived in the middle of the country. So, yeah.
Given the fact that the river has been engineered, and so is the Missouri, how radically has that changed the ecosystems of the river? I mean, the 350 species of plants that you've documented, I wonder, how many of those, how different would that have been if you took your phone back 200, 300 years, how different that would be. I wonder how much has what we see changed because it's been engineered in places?
Well, the engineering has made dramatic changes, and sometimes it's hard for us to get our heads around it because there's hardly anybody alive today who knows the river in any other form other than the way we've engineered it. The locks and dams were built in the 1930s, so there might be a few people alive who remember the river before that, but there aren't many. So it has changed it, and some of the changes are kind of slow acting, I think. The locks and dams have had a dramatic effect over the course of the last 90 years, filling in backwater channels. They trap sediment, so the backwater channels are filling in with sediment that might have otherwise just continued to flow on south. And then because of the wave action close to dams, we've lost a lot of islands. So we've lost habitat. But when I've talked with biologists about this, the answer I get consistently is we haven't really lost species. Mussels are the number of mussel species that are endangered, but we haven't really lost species. but we've lost abundance. So where John James Audubon might have seen 2 million plovers fly overhead, maybe now you see a couple thousand of a bird, and that's a lot. So I think the river doesn't have the ability to support that kind of abundance now, and primarily because we've lost the wetlands in particular, which are very important habitats for maintaining the abundance. So if we don't do anything different, then yeah, we will start losing species. But I think we still can see a lot of what, in terms of the plant and animal life, I think we can still see a lot of what people saw historically.
One of the other habitats that has been really decimated are the sand prairies.
Yeah, they've mostly been plowed or developed.
Yeah, and then the lack of ebb and flow in the river. They're taken care of, yeah.
Yeah, the sand prairies are interesting places too. I've been hiking around them quite a bit lately when I've been further north. There's a handful of places that are really accessible, beautiful sand prairies to visit around Fulton, Illinois, and Savannah. In that area, there's in the Lost Mountain Refuge, that's all basically sand prairie. And that's one of the few areas in the upper, in much of the upper Mississippi where there's still a continuous connection between the river and the bluffs and all the habitats in between. It's also mostly off limits because it was an ordnance depot for many years, and there's a lot of, let's say, unexploded ordnance probably buried in the ground in places. So probably 80% of the refuge is off limits to any pedestrian traffic. But there are some sand prairies that are cool, yeah.
Isn't Ellis Island sand prairie?
Yeah. It is.
Microcosm of it.
Right, and then across the bay, just downriver of the center, they have sand prairie there too.
On
So
the
right
roadside,
yeah,
roadside.
on the
Opposite the island.
yeah, yeah, on the Missouri side.
Mm-hmm. So that was probably created by dredge spoil, I'm guessing, though, because that's part of the mitigation project for building the milk price.
It's definitely mitigated
Yeah.
land for sure. They're redoing the sand prairies there because of the lease turn project and the soft shell turtles and one other species. It could be another soft shell turtle species that require the sand prairies to do their nesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's up north, the Lost Mountain unit and the sand prairies around Fulton. Those were post-glacial relics, basically. There was a dam that formed, an ice dam that formed on the river south of there, and it backed up and formed this big lake. And as the water stopped flowing, it dropped a lot of sand and sediment. And then as the dam cleared and the water flowed again, it left behind these beautiful sand prairies that have some very unique plant life that you don't see in other prairies. I was just up there 3 or 4 weeks ago and walking around the prairie at Fulton when the prickly pears were in full bloom. And I took way too many pictures of those, but it was really fun to see they're beautiful flowers. John could probably tell you the colors. I'm personally colorblind, so don't come to me for that. But it was just beautiful to see this fairly brown yet sand prairie at that time, punctuated by all these prickly pear blooms. Life's little pleasures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, we've got copies of books for sale up at the desk if you haven't gotten yours yet. And then we'll go ahead and get some books signed. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evan.
Do you need chairs moved or anything?
Let's